You know, we all grew up with fairy tales. You've got your kings, your princesses, your magic. But what if I told you that one of the most famous children's stories from Central Europe is actually a cover-up? That it's a coded message, a memory of an entire empire that was brought to its knees, not by an army, but by something we literally sprinkle on our dinner every single night.
And it all starts with this one line. This seemingly simple, almost kind of funny declaration of love. On the surface, it seems so innocent, right? But this one sentence would unleash a total catastrophe across a kingdom, and, in the process, reveal a secret history that's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. So let's set the scene. We're in the world of the classic Slovak fairy tale, Salt over Gold. And the plot is simple. You've got an old king who wants to divide his kingdom among his 3 daughters. And he's going to decide who gets what based on their answer to one simple question. How much do you love me? The oldest daughter, she steps up first. And she says her love is as precious, as valuable as gold. Well, the king, who's a guy who really appreciates the finer things in life, he is absolutely thrilled with this. Great answer. So the second daughter, not wanting to be outdone, she takes it up a notch. She compares her love for him to beautiful, rare, priceless jewels. And again, the king is just beaming. He's thinking, wow, my daughters, they really get what true value is all about. Or so he thinks. And then it's time for the youngest, Marushka. And when the king asks her, she just says, plainly, I love you as much as salt. And the king, he just loses it. He is furious. Salt, that cheap, common rock you find everywhere, he takes it as a massive insult. And in a total fit of rage, he banishes her from the kingdom forever. But here's the thing. The moment she's gone, a curse falls on the land. Every last grain of salt in the entire kingdom just disappears. At first, it's whatever. But pretty soon, the bread has no taste, they can't preserve any meat, and the livestock start getting sick and dying. The king learns a really tough lesson. All his gold and all his gems are completely worthless without that simple salt he hated so much. It's a great story, right? The moral is crystal clear. But this is the point where our whole explainer pivots. Because what if this isn't just a fable about a prideful king? What if this is the actual story of a real empire's collapse, just hidden inside a fairy tale? The whole theory is that salt over gold is like a historical echo. It's the memory of a real national disaster that was so traumatic, so profound, that the only way to remember it was to wrap it up and pass it down for centuries as a children's story. This idea has a name. It's sometimes called a metaphorical archive, or in Slovak, národná pamäť, a national memory. The point is that folklore isn't just for fun. It's how a culture processes and remembers its biggest wins and its most painful losses, encoding them in symbols and stories that last forever. So, to crack this code, we have to jump in a time machine and go way back, all the way back to the 9th century, to this massive Slavic empire called Great Moravia. It was rich, powerful, influential, but it had one fatal flaw. A strategic weakness that its enemies were just about to turn into a weapon. Now, you really have to get this. In the 9th century, salt wasn't just a seasoning. It was basically the oil of its day, a strategic super commodity. It was the only way you could preserve meat to feed your people or your army through the winter. It was vital for keeping your farm animals healthy, and it was a huge trade good. Basically, if you controlled the salt, you controlled everything. And this was Great Moravia's Achilles heel. Archaeologists have dug up their cities and found tons of gold jewelry, proof that they were incredibly wealthy. But you know what they haven't found? Any evidence of salt mines. The Moravians had the gold, just like our fairy tale king, but they were 100% dependent on other countries for the salt they needed to survive. And their biggest neighbors, the East Franks and the Bulgarian Empire, well, they just happened to control all the major salt mines nearby. Burn this year into your memory. 892 AD, because this is the moment that economic vulnerability gets weaponized. This is when the fairy tale starts to sound scarily like real history. So here's what happened, and we know this from historical records like the Annals of Fulda. In 892, the East Frankish king sent diplomats to the Bulgarians with a proposal. Hey, let's team up and cut off all salt shipments to Great Moravia. It was a coordinated economic attack. And we know it worked because later documents, like the Rafflestetten Customs Regulations, actually list salt as the main thing being traded to the market of the Moravians. By cutting off the salt from both sides, they literally starved the Moravian economy, which led to chaos, weakness, and eventually the complete collapse of their empire. Okay, so now for the best part. Let's put the fairy tale and the real history side by side. Because when you do, the parallels are, well, they're just jaw-dropping.
I mean, just look at this. The king's arrogance, his obsession with gold over something practical like salt, that's a perfect mirror for the Moravian ruling class, who were dripping in gold but totally ignored their fatal dependency on an imported resource. The salt magically disappearing in the story? Well, that's the salt embargo of 892 AD, a very real political move. The chaos and famine in the kingdom, that's a perfect metaphor for the real economic collapse that shattered Great Moravia. And the final lesson, that salt is worth more than gold, that was the incredibly bitter pill the Moravians had to swallow as their entire empire fell apart. So what does it all mean? It means this story that we tell our kids is so much more than that. It's a ghost, a warning from history, passed down from one generation to the next. When you think about it, salt over gold was the perfect way to remember one of the very first documented cases of economic warfare in Europe. You have this incredibly rich empire that didn't fall because its army was defeated in battle. It fell because its supply chain was cut. It's just a stunning reminder that real power isn't always about treasure chests. Sometimes it's about having control over the basic things that keep the society running. And that leaves us with one last massive what if. The Bulgarians had the salt. The Moravians had the gold. They were both powerful Slavic states. Instead of letting an outside power play them against each other, what if they had formed their own alliance? It's one of those huge, unanswered questions of history, and it's a thought that really sticks with you long after the fairy tale is over.